Hello there, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to build some Necron Temple Ruins. I wanted this set to kind of look like it was chiseled out of stone, with a main temple that was carved into a rocky cliff face, kind of like the temple in Petra from Indiana Jones if you're familiar with that. I also wanted this set to look like it was sinking into the ground a bit. A friend of mine printed these Necrosia terrain pieces out for me a few years ago. It's a pretty good set of terrain. I'll link to where I got them down below. The monolith structures are supposed to have these pieces added onto the tops and the bottoms, but honestly I like them better without those pieces, so I'm not going to be adding them on. So as you can see, I'm using an old project as a starting point here. I didn't add Mod Podge or anything to give these rock pieces a stronger outer shell, so I'm going to be fixing a few things to make them more resilient and also make them a little bit more playable. So these foam board bases stick out really far and they cause a lot of line of sight and terrain rule issues. I hate them, so I'm going to take them off. Also, I had a respirator on for the majority of this project, so just keep that in mind if you're doing any sort of sanding, cutting, or working around fumes. You should have a respirator on. Instead of the foam board, I'm going to be using 1/8 inch MDF, and I want the lips of the bases to sit as flush with the perimeter of the terrain as possible. Up until now, I've been using 1/4 inch MDF for these projects, and I was curious if I could cut 1/8 inch MDF with anything other than a jigsaw. So I tried cutting this stuff with a razor blade, tin snips, and my Dremel, and the answer is no, God no. Do yourself a favor and use a jigsaw if you're going to cut MDF bases like this. Just be careful if you do. I'll save this for later. With my bases cut out, I gave the edges a light sanding. I didn't bevel them like I have in past projects. These MDF sheets are flat on one side and textured on the other, and I opted to have the flat side facing up because I figured the textured side would grip the battle map a little bit better. That was my theory anyway. Using a Dremel, I cut sections of the structures away so they would sit on an angle. The monoliths were printed on an FDM printer, and they don't really kick up dust when you cut them like this. These pieces are resin prints though. Yeah, I better get a vacuum for this. Again, make sure you have a respirator on if you do this. You do not want to inhale this stuff. Ideally, you want to avoid cutting resin like this altogether. You'd be better off just adjusting the file before printing it, but I wasn't planning on doing this when I printed them, so I gotta cut them. Time to start assembling the ruins. I'm cutting an angle on the foam board here to match the angles that I cut on the ruin pieces. And for a stronger bond, I am scoring the foam in the MDF before I join them. I am using construction adhesive here. This stuff works really well, just try and avoid touching it and make sure you're working in a well ventilated area. It does give off a lot of fumes. Also, ideally you want to give this stuff a few days to dry. I also made these really sharp angled cuts on the tops of the foam to create this stone slab texture. In addition to construction adhesive, I used hot glue to hold the larger pieces together while I was working on them. That kept everything from constantly shifting around. Like I said before, I want the MDF bases to sit flush with the perimeter of the rocks as much as possible. If you're wondering why I even bothered to add a base, it is an optional step, but the MDF base adds a lot of weight to these light foam rocks, and it also grips the battle map a lot better than a smooth piece of foam would. It just gives you a more stable terrain piece in the end. I'm using some pretty advanced rock texturing techniques here. Mostly I'm using the score and scratch technique to create layers of stone, making cuts that crisscross each other and then peeling them away. I cut as much of the exposed MDF off as possible, but there were a few small sections that I had to bevel with the Dremel. Next we're going to get a little sloppy. I dumped some wood glue into my glue tub and applied it liberally around the bottom edges of each node. I'm laying these nodes out on the wax paper to minimize the mess and keep them from sticking to the table. I think you know what's coming next. Sand followed by grout. Get that grout into every nook and cranny. The goal here is to blend the bases into the rocks as much as possible and also hide some join lines. After giving that a day to dry, I sprayed these terrain nodes down with watered down PVA and then IPA to seal the grout. I did that twice. Next I went in with some spackling, just filling in some of the foam gaps here to hide some of the unnatural looking join lines. And with that dry, we're ready to start painting. I mixed up some Mod Podge, black paint, and burnt umber paint. I wanted a nice dark base coat here. The Mod Podge really helps strengthen up the paint and also glue together any loose bits of foam. Next I went in with a lighter coat of brown, mixed with Mod Podge as well. And after that, a coat of light gray. Just keep in mind that Mod Podge dries clear. I almost forgot to add some white paint to this. Is there anything more satisfying than a nice dry brushing? Maybe a nice wash. For the wash, I'm just using a bit of dish soap, water, and ink. and then some Mod Podge and some more paint because my wash is too watered down. If you just want boring old gray rocks, you could stop here, but these are not your grandpa's rocks, buddy. Let me tell you, we're gonna keep going. I'm dry brushing some khaki and beige around the base edges here, and selectively around the rocks as well, adding a bit more contrast and color. Next, we are going to airbrush some game ink blue on these suckers, blending some exotic blue hues into those brown areas and darker parts. I applied the blue pretty heavily onto the ruins. And then I toned down the brown areas with some black. I wanted the dark areas to be this pretty deep bluish black, almost like coal. And finally, I did yet another dry brushing pass with a light tan color. Just a little bit of highlighting in some of the lighter areas. And with an off-camera matte finish, they were done. This set's gonna look pretty great on a snowy mat. Unfortunately, I do not have a snowing mat, but here they are on a sheet of white fleece. It's close enough. You get the idea. They also look pretty good on forest and desert maps. Cue the glamour shots. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you did. Like and subscribe if you didn't. There are a few links down below if you want to help support the channel. Check them out. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you later.